Hello everyone, just Goran here and welcome back to another Planet Zoo real life inspiration video. That guy must have such an itchy nose, poor lad. Today we are looking at the African spurred tortoise, which are always either lying about or perhaps doing something or just lying about, who knows. Today will be the final episode of the Planet Zoo Zookeepers Animal Pack. And it's a jam-packed video with 30 African spurred tortoise habitats. So let's get started right away with Almere Jungle, and we are in the Africa part of this greenhouse, mainly greenhouse zoo. We can see we've got some African hut theming all over the place, and we were just looking at the meerkat habitat, which has a window kind of into this, which I think is part of the African spurred tortoise habitat, at least I do believe. There is this bridge going over the visitor path down into the spurred tortoise habitat, so I think the spurred tortoises are able to cross this bridge to get to that other side that we were just looking at. They were all kind of chilling in this indoor area. Would you consider this an indoor area? I mean, the entire area is indoor. It's inside a greenhouse. But something really cool about this enclosure is that inside the enclosure is this barrel that is actually a giant snail enclosure as well, which is pretty neat. And yeah, that is the African spurred tortoise habitat of Almere Jungle. So let's move on to the next zoo, which is going to be a zoo of Antwerp. And in the Zoo of Antwerp we are just exiting the reptile house of the zoo, and there is this small greenhouse kind of attached to this classical building, which has the African spurred tortoises to the right of the path in this kind of ditch ravine like thing. We could also see an iguana sitting on one of the logs alongside the paths, and as we continue further down this corridor we'll be able to see even more of them right over here, actually sleeping on that log right there. Really quite cool that they're free roaming in this space. What's also quite interesting about this enclosure is just how narrow it gets, and the fact that the enclosure goes underneath the path to get to the other side over here, where we can see an African spurred tortoise doing the deed. Absolutely awesome. But yeah, quite a narrow enclosure, but still quite a bit of space for them in this entire structure, which is pretty quite cool. But that is it, and we are reaching the end of the hallway and going to the next zoo, which is Apenheul. We're entering one of the newest areas of this zoo, which is a walkthrough exhibit for the king colobus and the northern telepoin. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this walkthrough monkey exhibit is also home to some African spurred tortoises. They're not free roaming like the monkeys are. They're actually in their own separate space across this little bit of water over there, which is pretty overgrown. I don't think they're in there yet, at least not when I visited. Maybe nowadays they are. Something that's quite hard to see actually is there is also some glass panels separating it from the visitor path. But yeah, here is the space for the monkeys, and here you can see the king colobus. I don't really have any good footage of the telepoin, but yeah, this is some older footage from like a year ago, so everything still has to grow in. But here you can see the exhibit a little better. It's to the left of this water, and now it's to the right. And there you can see those glass panels for just a fraction of a second. But I never recorded the exhibit for the tortoises that well, so that's the best I got. Next up is Berkenhof Tropical Zoo, which is another greenhouse zoo, and we're in this space that has a whole bunch of dinosaurs and other themed stuff. And inside of this space with a Triceratops hat and a Stegosaurus. Maybe they're trying to make some connection with the Stegosaurus and the tortoise, that they both have like protection on their backs. I'm not sure why they wouldn't go with an Ankylosaurus for that, but anyway, it's dinosaur, cool. That's it for this zoo. Let's move on to BestZoo, which have a very simple tiny enclosure over here. What stood out to me about this one is that it's like the only one in the video that doesn't have like a pool. And you do also have an indoor viewing over here. Not that there's much to see except for the tortoises year round, so that's nice, I guess. But yeah, very simple enclosure. Let's move on to Diergaarde Blijdorp. We are entering the Crocodile River, and the first thing we see as we come into the space is a window into the African spurred tortoise habitat over here. Again, we can see an African spurred tortoise going at it to the right over there. And we can see these kind of more backstage-like walls, which aren't as decorated as the other ones. That was the window we were looking from, and from this bridge over here we can also look down into the space. I love all of the rock work and landscaping of this enclosure. It is just kind of a bummer that we're looking at it from so high up. You don't really get to notice just how big these tortoises are from this height, but still very cool looking enclosure, definitely quite inspirational. Next up we have Reptielenhuis de Aarde, where the first enclosure you encounter actually is this African spur tortoise habitat over here, which at the end of the day it was hot enough for them to actually open the doors and the tortoises could go outside. You can get really close up with them, which is pretty cool, but there is also space for the tortoises to move away from the guests. So yeah, on the inside over here we also have their indoor enclosure, which has a little bit of landscaping, really nice back wall over there, some heating lamps obviously, and yeah, just a really solid enclosure right there. It is a bit square, but definitely really good looking for a smaller reptile house like this one. And what's cool as well is this person was having like a birthday party behind the scenes tour, and they were allowed to feed the tortoises there, so that was really cool. Next up is probably one of the most special ones in this video. This is Tiergarten Delitzsch, and we can already see some pretty tall fencing around this enclosure. And I will say this is not actually the spur tortoise enclosure just yet. This is for a different animal. We can actually see the tortoise enclosure in the back there. We can see the little ridge of rock, and we can see a tortoise walking behind it. That is kind of a separated area for the tortoises, which cannot cross this wall. But what can cross this wall is the animal that they are mixed with, which you can see walking around there. And you might already be surprised. Yeah, this is an enclosure with spur tortoises and servals. So we have a predator-prey setup, I guess. I'm guessing servals don't prey on tortoises, but I will say I've never seen a tortoise walk that fast in my life. So that was really interesting. The servals did not care for the tortoises at all, from what I could tell. They were trying to find some bugs or whatever. But yeah, it was really interesting to see this, and quite a interesting mix right there. So maybe in Planet Zoo, of course, we don't have servals, we do have caracals. Could be something as well to try. I thought it was really interesting. There's also a backstage over here, which has signs for both the tortoises and the servals. So my guess is they do both go in the same backstage over here. Really interesting. Definitely the most special mix that I would have never expected for these animals to be in this video. But we do have some other cool mixes coming up as well, so don't worry about that. Anyway, next up we have DoeZoo Leens, a small zoo in the north of the Netherlands as well. And as we leave the kind of reptile house area of this zoo, we have again a greenhouse over here with both African spur tortoises as well as leopard tortoises. And outside of this greenhouse, they're just completely free roaming, so they can come up to you, you can come up to them, you can pet them a little bit. It's really, really cool. I absolutely love this so much. Yeah, definitely the closest encounters I've had with the tortoises, and they are so freaking cute. I will say they're not the brightest of the bunch, because this tortoise was trying to get through through this gap that he obviously could not fit through. I guess they don't really know their own sizes that well. And then this over here, just for completionist sake, this is a leopard tortoise, and they're also so freaking awesome. I love them so much, just the patterning on them. But yeah, this is a pretty large enclosure. We've got a pool over there, there's a fence over here, so there is some spaces for the tortoises to go where people aren't allowed to come, so they can get away from the guests a little bit. Again, we've got a bit of a greenhouse type thing over here as well, which is another indoor area for them to retreat to. And yeah, that's pretty much it for DoeZoo Leens. So let's move on to the next zoo, which is the Zoo of Dortmund. And again, similar to what we saw in Delitzsch, we've got a pretty tall fence over here, so that's probably not for the tortoises. So put your guesses in right now for what kind of mixed enclosure this would be for. And 3, 2, 1, it is for the bat-eared fox. So it's another tiny predator, definitely more of an insectivore, so even safer than the serval, I would say. But yeah, over here is the indoor enclosure. I don't know if it's completely finished yet. The sign on the window did say moving in soon, so the tortoises weren't actually here yet when I visited the zoo. So maybe there was some more rock work and stuff to be added to that enclosure to make it look a little bit more interesting. But yeah, next up we have the Zoo Eberswalde, and I was looking forever for some footage of the enclosure here. I thought it would be in this reptile house, and I was technically correct. After a long search, I realized that this tiny clip over here of the indoor part of this enclosure, that was actually a mixed African spur tortoise and leopard tortoise enclosure. And over here, the outside part is in this kind of enclosure that is also for red-bellied lemur as well as black and white ruffed lemur, which you can see over here in their own little indoor area right here. So that's all the footage I have of it. I didn't notice them that well when I visited. So That was that. Next up we have Dierenpark Hoenderdaell, which also have a very small, rectangular, very simple enclosure over here. I do like all the palms. Those are definitely giving a nice deserty feel. But yeah, this is in the middle of a tropical house, a greenhouse area as well. And it's just a nice little addition there. Next up we have Kasteelpark Born, and we can tell by the big castle over there, which is why it's a titular castle park. But over here is the African spur tortoise enclosure, and I know that the sign says banded wallaby. This is a mixed African spur tortoise and banded wallaby enclosure. I don't know why you would mix those two, but I guess it's a thing here. Next up we have Zoo Maubeuge, where we do have a lovely enclosure for the tortoises, if you ask me. It's just this very nice green field. It's very long. I don't know if this part that we're looking at right now would also be used for the tortoises, because at the moment it was closed off in the middle. But yeah, I don't know why, I just really like this enclosure. Over here we've got some small trees giving some shade. There's also a shade structure over there. I guess I just really like the lushness of the greenness of the grass, the lushness in the back. And the interesting shape, because it's not completely straight, it's kind of waving. There is multiple viewpoints as you come along. You can see there's a little ramp going into the greenhouse, because otherwise probably they wouldn't be able to get in. And the greenhouse itself is closed off a little bit at the bottom with some peepholes for the kids, but also adults can just peek over into here and enjoy the tortoises during the colder months probably. So yeah, that's it for Zoo Maubeuge. Next up we have Mondo Verde, where again the tortoises are in this greenhouse, which is quite a lovely greenhouse, if not for the fact that it felt a little bit dated while I was here and a little bit run down. And something that definitely didn't help with that was this enclosure. As far as I could tell, this is the African spur tortoise enclosure. I didn't see any tortoises in here, and that might be a good thing, because I did not really like what I saw here. This might be the smallest enclosure in this. No, wait, no, there is worse stuff coming, never mind. But yeah, that's it for Mondo Verde. Next up, we have Dierenpark de Oliemeulen. Again, I didn't exactly know if this is actually the African spur tortoise enclosure here. This enclosure I know is for Hermann's tortoises, but it's also the only tortoise-like enclosure that this zoo has. I know they have African spur tortoises, I just don't know where they are. If they put them here only during the summer or something like that and keep them backstage the rest of the year. It feels like that's what they're doing, but again, I've never seen them out here, so I'm not sure if that's the case. So maybe I'm completely wrong, let me know if I am. Next up we have Pairi Daiza, where the African spur tortoises are in kind of a back alley of the African village area of the zoo, in this rather simple enclosure with just some chain link and wooden fencing around. And yeah, I feel like this could have been a lot better. I love the foliage and stuff in the back, and I think it would have been really cool if they found a way to not have this fence in the back. It would look so freaking good. But yeah, this is what we got. Next up is Pakawi Park, and we are again entering a tropical house, which might be the nicest thing in Pakawi, if not for some things in here. Mainly the birds did not all look the best. But the tortoise enclosures over here definitely do look quite nice, I will say. The only thing I don't really like is this kind of rundown metal fence in the front that looks a little bit odd. I like this sign over here. It's saying I have a shield too, and it's showing some other animals that have a shield thing for protection, like armadillos, stuff like that. It also talks over here about tortoise welfare. It says tortoises aren't camels. If a tortoise has humps, it's actually a sign of bad health. Cool thing to teach people. Over here we actually have the African spur tortoise enclosures, and you can see they're separated by a small gap that the larger tortoises wouldn't be able to get through, so a nice way to get the smaller tortoises kind of separate to their own little space. So yeah, next up is Pantropica, and here we have a species mix that honestly I felt like would have been more common. We've got meerkats together with African spur tortoises in a very not too fancy indoor enclosure. They also have a little tunnel going under this bridge over here, so they can get on either side of the paths. Something that I absolutely loved here is how much the meerkats also seem to enjoy the heat lamps for the tortoises, and how little the tortoises seem to care about the presence of the meerkats over there. Really quite fun stuff nice shenanigans from the meerkats. But yeah, both sides pretty decently sized, and overall just a lovely enclosure right there. And then next up we have ReptielenZoo Iguana. And I just want to give some context over here that this zoo is entirely inside of this building. So the tortoise enclosure is actually in the basement, so we're taking the stairs down, and you can still see kind of the structure of this old building all around us. What's worth mentioning is that this is a rescue, so they don't always have the budget or the means to make very amazing enclosures, but they definitely tried something with this spur tortoise habitat, with all of these kind of height variations and stuff with the concrete. So that's something, at least in this this little basement over here. And there's also this sign over here, which is pretty cool. It explains that this group of tortoises already bred over 300 new tortoises, 100 of which has been sent to European zoos, 100 of which has been sent to American zoos, and 100 of which have been sent back to Africa. So that's really, really cool right there. Next up, we have Zoo Schwerin, which has another pretty interesting mixed enclosure over here. You wouldn't say it from the fence, but this is a mixed enclosure with the African spur tortoise and gold-bellied capuchin monkeys. Yes, this is an enclosure that keeps capuchin monkeys. This fence is apparently good enough for that. There's actually something you see in several German zoos, so this is not the only zoo that does it. But yeah, it's certainly interesting to have the South American capuchin monkey with the African spur tortoise, but still a nice mix regardless, and a cool capuchin monkey enclosure. So yeah, let's move on to the next zoo. This is TerraZoo Rheinberg, and we are entering the zoo, and the first thing that we see is a lemur. But also, of course, I wouldn't be showing this if it wasn't also a African spur tortoise habitat. So yeah, this is a mixed habitat with the ring-tailed lemur and the African spur tortoise. So they've got this small space over here near the entrance with some nice glass viewing areas where you can see the tortoises really well through. Don't worry for the lemurs, by the way, they also have an outdoor enclosure that they can get through some kind of like pipe structure across the ceiling, which is quite interesting. Next we have Texel Zoo, and this is another zoo where I personally didn't see the tortoises, but I found pictures of them in this enclosure over here behind the rocks. Currently this is a tufted marmoset enclosure. I don't know if that was also the case when the tortoises were still in here, presumably. I don't know when they would have left. The pictures I found were a couple years old already, but yeah, still nice to see what the enclosure would have looked like, and give you some inspiration perhaps for that. So yeah, that's it for Texel Zoo. Next up we have Freizeitpark Thüle, and over here we have actually a very lovely enclosure. Only downside is that I saw it in the winter. It definitely would look a lot nicer and lusher looking at all of these bushes over here if those were actually grown in. But yeah, pretty nice, a large enclosure over here. I love the little bit of decoration with the parasol, but most of all just all the little hills and stuff all around. It just looks really, really nice. So yeah, next up we have Uilen and Dierenpark de Paay, where this is it. I mean, I don't know what I can say about this one. It is super slender and very straight. I don't know why there's a hot wire at the top here. I feel like that's only going to injure guests. Maybe it's to disincentivize guests from petting the tortoises. But yeah, that was it. Next up, Zoo Veldhoven. We are again in a greenhouse, which currently its main purpose is this playground over here. A lot of the paths around the greenhouse currently aren't accessible. At least they were not when I was here, which at this point is like a year or so ago, but you could still enjoy the tortoises from up on the balcony looking down. So pretty nice large enclosure for them right there. But that's all for Zoo Veldhoven. So next up we have Wildlands Adventure Zoo, and again we are in a indoor playground actually, but the tortoises are not inside the playground, but you do have to kind of make your way through this playground to get to the tortoises. And yeah, it's a pretty nice enclosure. I like the rock work. It's pretty cool, but the space around it feels kind of out of place in a zoo as themed as Wildlands. This very kind of clinical corridor almost. It feels a little off. The enclosure itself is very nicely themed with the rock work, but the whole way around it is, yeah, very bland. But yeah, that's it for Wildlands. Next up we have Dierenpark Zie-Zoo, and I don't know how this keeps happening, but again, I don't have great footage of Zie-Zoo. I have this very old footage over here looking into this enclosure before it's like all overgrown. I'm not sure how this enclosure works exactly, because the top of it is like mesh, so I'm guessing it's pretty cold in here during the winter, so I guess the tortoises aren't here in the winter necessarily, but yeah, disregarding the fact that the footage is absolutely horrible, there is one cool thing about this enclosure, and it is the species mix. This enclosure mixes the African spur tortoises with some birds, as well as the rock hyrax that we can see right here, which is just an absolutely awesome animal, and a really fun one, I think, to mix with the tortoises, breathing some life into the enclosure when they're not just lying about doing nothing like this one is. But yeah, next up we have the Zonnegloed, which is another rescue animal sanctuary type place. Very simple backstage building over here with all the wood, but still quite nice. Really large as well, and some heating lamps in there. And then the enclosure itself is just this nice large yard over here. You can see they have a ton of these tortoises. Yeah, I guess a lot of them have to be rescued from like the pet trade or something. I don't know. I don't think I have good footage of the sign that explains their backstory. But yeah, last zoo already for this video is the Zoom Erlebniswelt, and I also couldn't remember where the tortoises in the zoo were. I was like, I don't think I saw them in the Africa area, which would have been the logical place to put them. But yeah, it's because they have their own little area. They're not in any area, they are in the tortoise garden. Sorry, in Dutch and German, turtle and tortoise is the same word, so I might have messed that up somewhere in this video already, and you've already written your angry comments. But yeah, that's why that happens, okay? It's all just schildpad or schildkröt. So yeah, anyway, this is the indoor part of the tortoise enclosure. As you can see, there's a lot more backstage back there through that door. And over here is some education about the world of tortoises, the tortoises in the zoo, as well as dangers that tortoises face in the wild, or not just tortoises but also turtles, because in German it's the same word. And yeah, over here is also another bit of backstage, but I don't think that's for tortoises because it doesn't look it doesn't look like something for tortoises. So yeah, that's it for Zoom Erlebniswelt, and those were all the tortoise African spur tortoise enclosures that I've seen. So we're ending off the video right here with a very active tortoise with stamina. I couldn't believe he was doing this for like 10 plus minutes. I got bored watching. That's how long he was doing this. So yeah, hope you got some tortoise inspiration. Next week will be the Galapagos giant tortoise, another tortoise video. I did not plan to do two tortoise videos in a row, but I recorded that video before the DLC was even announced, so it's there, it's coming. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed that one as well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.